Hey guys, Supernova here. I'm an atheist giving you an atheist perspective on How Do We Know the Bible is True, Volume 1, co-edited by Ken Ham and Bodhi Hodge, and written by a variety of authors who all work at the Answers in Genesis Foundation. And we are almost done. There's only 4 chapters left in this book. I'm going to go through 2 chapters in each of the 2 remaining videos, starting with chapter 25, What is Wrong with Atheism? I'm an atheist. I suspect you're probably an atheist, so this is rather important. This would be the one that we want to read. It's written by Jason Leisel, who is an astrophysicist and has written many of the chapters in this book, and he's a pretty rational and smart guy, even though he's totally biased, and that is why he does many of the logical mistakes that he does. Atheists are coming out of the closet and becoming more vocal about their message that there is no God. Professor Richard Dawkins is encouraging those who share his views to express their opinion. Dawkins says he wants to free children from being indoctrinated with the religion of their parents or their community, which I imagine Christians would agree with if it was talking about children being indoctrinated in other religions. I imagine that they'd like Muslims to hear the Christian message, or at least others, and be allowed to come to their own conclusions, but of course he's biased. He's against this because it's talking about Christianity. Will Christians be prepared to give an answer to the atheist claim? And we've got a citation here. Christian philosopher Dr. Greg Banson often used this analogy. Dr. Banson was known as the man atheists most feared. They're so cute at that age. Why is he mentioning the man feared most by atheists? I have never heard of this guy, but I'm not fearful of him because I imagine that Jason Leisel is using this guy's arguments, and I'm not persuaded by Leisel's arguments, so I probably wouldn't be persuaded by his. But nevertheless, let's say that he had great arguments against atheism and great arguments for Christianity. Should a rational person fear that? Should they duck and dodge arguments from somebody that they can't refute? No, I think they ought to do the open-minded thing and change their mind and agree, be persuaded, not fear them. But nonetheless, that would be contingent on us actually hearing some good arguments. Materialistic atheism is one of the easiest worldviews to refute. Oh, great, so maybe he'll actually do it here. Materialistic atheist believes that nature is all there is, as opposed to supernature. I don't believe in supernatural things. You probably don't. He believes that there is no transcendent God who oversees and maintains creation. Many atheists believe that their worldview is rational and scientific. Yep, I'll agree with that. However, by embracing materialism, the atheist has destroyed the possibility of knowledge as well as science and technology. In other words, if atheism were true, it would be impossible to prove anything. Gee, I wonder where he's going with this. He's used the same argument over and over. I imagine he uses it here. Here's why. Reasoning involves using the laws of logic, and then he discusses what the laws of logic are. For the Christian, there is an absolute standard for reasoning. We are to pattern our thoughts after God's. The laws of logic are a reflection of the way God thinks. Oh, what a surprise. So he says, you can't use logic because it's based on a Christian worldview, and you'd have to borrow from our worldview to use it. I've already answered this argument so many times I'm not even going to bother again. The materialistic atheist can't have laws of logic. He believes that everything that exists is material, part of the physical world. We believe in the natural world, but we don't necessarily believe that everything exists material. But laws of logic are not physical. Laws of logic cannot exist in the atheist world, yet he uses them to try to reason. So this is where he's steered wrong. Is this true of you? It's certainly not true of me. I don't know any atheist who believes that everything that exists is material. None of us say, oh, things that are just concepts or ideas, those are non-existent. We don't believe in the supernatural, but laws of logic aren't supernatural. This is inconsistent. He is borrowing from the Christian worldview to argue against the Christian worldview. Oh, it's so adorable. This is the same argument he's used over and over again. It's never made sense. Still doesn't. The atheist might say, well, I can reason just fine. I don't believe in God. But this is no different from the critic of air saying, well, I can breathe just fine. I don't believe in air. Things that exist don't exist because they're believed in. Like, we didn't know well, I imagine we've had a concept of air for a long time, but there are things like physical sound, for instance. We didn't ever think that there were vibrations of sound traveling through air. That even if you didn't believe that or were ignorant of it, that didn't stop you from making sounds. You don't have to believe in something to use it. This is absurd. It doesn't make any sense. The atheist might respond, laws of logic are conventions made up by man, but conventions are by definition conventional. That is, we all agree to them and so they work, which is what conventional means. Like driving on the right side of the road, but if laws of logic were conventional, then different cultures could adopt different laws of logic, like driving on the left side of the road. No, they couldn't. Laws of logic are descriptive, not prescriptive. We didn't choose what the laws of logic would be. They were observations of how the way things are, and we call them laws because they're consistent. If somebody decided to make their own laws of logic, I mean they could, but it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be true. It wouldn't be observations of the way things work if they were different from our laws of logic. You couldn't have a different description of the truth than we have. It's not arbitrary. There's a reason that logic works the way it currently works. There's a reason why laws of logic don't change from country to country. The atheist might respond, laws of logic are material. They are made of electrochemical connections in the brain. I won't even answer that because we don't believe laws of logic are material, and we don't have to. We don't believe that the material world is all there is. It's so silly. Sometimes an atheist will attempt to answer with a more pragmatic response. We use the laws of logic because they work. That is a good response. Unfortunately for him, that isn't the question. We all agree the laws of logic work. They work because they're true. The question is, why do they exist in the first place? No, I didn't ask that question. You shouldn't be either. We don't care why. We just care about their utility. As a last response, the atheist may give up a strictly materialistic view and agree that there are immaterial universal laws. Like, that's the position I'm already at. I don't have to give up a materialistic view. I already believe that concepts and ideas can exist. This is a huge concession. After all, if a person is willing to concede that immaterial, universal, unchanging entities can exist, then he must consider the possibility that God exists. I have considered the possibility. I allow for the possibility. He's making this false dilemma that you either have to believe that God exists or believe that he doesn't exist. Like, there's no skeptic's point of view where you say, well, he could exist, I just don't have any evidence, which is where I'm sitting, which is where I imagine you sit. But this concession does not save the atheist position. He still must justify the laws of logic. Why do they exist? Well, this is a good question. Logic is a little troublesome because it's presumed. You can't prove logic with logic because that would be begging the question. And if you go to another standard to try to prove logic, then we might ask, well, what proves that that standard is a good one? And if you went to another standard, you'd get an infinite regress. At some point, you have to assume, you have to presuppose that something is true. And I know I go on about how Christians shouldn't do this with the Bible because axioms, that is, our presupposed assumptions, have to be basic. If I believe that logic works and you don't, end of conversation. I'm not going to convince you with logic because you don't value it. At the same time, if you're coming to me with the Bible and you've already presupposed it's true, this conversation will get nowhere because yours wasn't as basic as it could be, and maybe mine isn't either. Maybe you don't value logic, but again, there's no point in reasoning. There's no point in debate if you haven't accepted my axiom, and he has accepted that. We agree the laws of logic work. They work because they're true. He does believe in logic, which is why we should be arguing on that level and not accepting an additional axiom like the Bible is true. The laws of logic, an objection from an atheist. The laws of logic are a necessary extension of the laws of nature in this universe, and humankind has evolved enough to recognize and utilize these laws of logic. I'm not using that objection. I don't know who would. Skip. His responses are long. One of the arguments went as the uniformity of the universe is property of the universe is obviously an assumption, as you said. Why do we account for this uniformity? The answer is this. In order to be rational, the mark of rationality is to have a good reason for what we believe. And remember, it is biblical to have a reason for what we believe. Citing my favorite verse, two key forms of irrationality are inconsistency and arbitrariness, not having a reason. Kind of. If you look up rationality in the dictionary, an online dictionary, you'll find that it means to be consistent with logic, to be logically consistent, not just to be consistent. And arbitrariness, not really. It doesn't figure into the definition. He says not having a reason, but you can be rational without having a reason. For instance, when I go out and get coffee from Dunkin' Donuts, I like blueberry and raspberry. I like the really fruity, tasty flavors. But I don't always get the same kind. I like them both about equally. And so when I choose to get coffee, I may choose one at random. Or I may choose whatever one I didn't have last. Or whatever I'm having a craving for. Whatever. It's arbitrary. It doesn't really matter. Am I being irrational? Kinda. I mean, if there's a best flavor, then I'm not getting the best flavor every time. But the best flavor changes from time to time. I feel that I'm being rational. At least I'm being consistent with logic. There's nothing logically inconsistent about having a different opinion each time. Nonetheless, I don't see that arbitrariness has anything to do with rationality. And just consistency in general isn't good enough either. For instance, if you were to say, I agree with everything that President Obama says and I disagree with everything that President Bush says, that would be consistent because you would consistently be pro-Obama and anti-Bush, at least at this present time with those two presidents. And it wouldn't be arbitrary because I would assume you'd be a Democrat in that case if you were pro-Democrat and against a Republican. And I've seen a lot of people have this, or at least my friends and family who are all Christians seem to have the opposite one. They disagree with everything that Obama says and does just because he is who he is, and they agree with everything Bush does because he's part of their party. But nonetheless, it's not rational, especially since on some things they both agree. For instance, they're both Christian. I know that my family would argue against that because they don't like to they understand how inconsistent that is to be anti-Obama while he's a Christian. But nonetheless, there's going to be a contradiction there somewhere. You can't be logically consistent by holding on to that consistency because there's going to be contradictions. And it hardly matters whether it's arbitrary or not, whether you pick that for arbitrary reasons or not. It has nothing to do with rationality. I think Jason Leisel kind of understands rationality, but not really. So anyway, in conclusion, he says, clearly atheism is not a rational worldview. It's self-refuting because the atheist must first assume the opposite of what he's trying to prove in order to be able to prove anything. I don't even like that term, prove, because it kind of gives a conclusiveness to something like, oh, I've proven this is true. I can never unbelieve it. I can never believe the opposite, even if given evidence to the contrary. I mean, you can technically prove things, but it feels so dogmatic in most cases. But anyway, it is a perfectly rational worldview, and even Christianity isn't necessarily irrational, although biased. I mean, that's the big problem. He can't stick with logic because he has to keep abandoning it to defend his Christian worldview. But anyway, that's chapter 25. We're done with Jason Leisel's writings. And on to chapter 26. Other religious writings. Can they be from God too? This is written by Bodhi Hodge, one of the co-editors of this book. I think a mechanical engineer. The answer seems too simple. Other alleged divine writings are not from God because they are not among the 66 books of the Bible, and in fact they contradict the Bible. That's interesting. He's going to point out contradictions, a lot of them. I wonder if he's going to use contradictions that might be also found in the Bible. I wonder if he's going to use the defenses against contradictions that he would use if somebody pointed them out in the Bible. I'm going to guess because of his bias? No. And because I've read this chapter, I know that's not true. All right, a presuppositional approach. This is a presuppositional approach, which means to presuppose that God exists in His Word, the Bible is the truth. And that's fine for a starting point for this, if he's going to assume that, make his assumption that the Bible is just the 66 books there. With this, God never tried to prove his existence or prove that his word is superior to other writings. God simply opens the Bible with a statement of his existence and says his word is flawless. The Bible bluntly claims to be the truth, and Christ repeated this claim. By the way, nothing in this is going to argue for those 66 books. And that's kind of important. Like when Jason Leisel at the very beginning of this book argued that the Bible is true, and he cites a couple sections from the Bible. It's making the fallacy of hasty generalization to say, well, if this part of the Bible is true, then all must be true. If there's a part in the Bible that supports this idea that it's God inspired, then all must be God inspired. Why? Because it all shares a binding. I mean, it's entirely logically possible for something false to have sneaked into the Bible, or something that should be in the Bible to have never made it to the Bible. I would use the Gospel of John, which contradicts all the other Gospels, as a great example of something that shouldn't have ended up in the Bible. Or the book of Jasher is something that should have been in the Bible but didn't because we don't have it. But nonetheless, it doesn't matter what the Bible says about the Bible being true, because we don't have anything that demonstrates what the Bible is or should be. There's just what the Bible currently appears to be to Christians. God will not contradict himself. In the Bible we read that God cannot lie. This is significant because it means that God's words will never have contradictions. Though skeptics have alleged that there are contradictions in the Bible, every such claim has been refuted, usually rather easily. That's funny. I've given Christians many of contradictions that I haven't heard refutations from, and I've often heard very poor refutations. I'm not even going to bother to give more. There are plenty out there. Check skepticsantibible.com. It's a great resource for that. This is what we would expect if God's word were perfect. Yet the world is filled with other religious writings that claim divine origin or have been treated as equal to or higher than the Bible on matters of truth or guidelines of living. In other words, these writings are treated as a final authority over the Bible, or at least as good as the Bible. Any religious writing that claims divine inspiration or authority equal to the Bible can't be from God if it is not part of the Bible and can be tested by contradictions. So, hilariously, he's going to try to show contradictions between the Bible and other religious writings. It's not hilarious that he's using this. I think it's a great standard. It's just the fact that if he weren't biased against these, if these were part of the Bible, he would have an answer to them. And I'm going to give the answer that might be given. A religious writing can be tested by comparing what it says with the Bible. God will never disagree with himself because God cannot lie. Religious books such as the Quran, Mormonism's Book of Mormon, and Hinduism's Vedas, Jehovah's Witnesses Watchtower publications, and so on contradict the Bible. For example, the Quran in 2 chapters, Surah 4:171 and 23:91, says God has no son, but the Bible is clear that Jesus is the only begotten Son of God. Well, maybe it means son in a different sense, like a literal descendant who came from a father's sperm and a mother's egg and became a son. And in that case, maybe the Quran means that God has no descendant when it says son. Or it could be that Surah 4 and 23, the two that claim this, that God has no son, are apocryphal books that somehow got into the Quran, but the rest of it is perfect. It's a silly refutation, but again, this is the type that we would expect from Christians if they were defending this, rather than saying, oh, these contradictions clearly exist because I have no reason to defend them. The Book of Mormon says in Moroni 8:8 that children are not sinners, but the Bible teaches that children are sinful, even from birth, citing Psalm 51:5. Do Christians really believe this? I mean, we have the example of Elijah who went to heaven without dying, and Enoch who walked with God and never died. One would assume from this that neither of them were sinful because they didn't die. It wouldn't make sense. It would contradict part of the Bible. And coming from a Christian worldview, I know that most Christians don't believe that they sin. So the Bible doesn't teach that children are sinful even from birth. It teaches that they have a sin nature. And I imagine that an obvious exception, even if you accept those two, is Jesus. Do you believe that Jesus was sinful even from birth? So it's kind of silly. This isn't even a contradiction because the Bible does not teach that children are sinful even from birth. Also, such religious writings contain contradictions within themselves that are unanswerable without gymnastics of logic. So unself-aware. Christians use gymnastics of logic to answer many contradictions. In the Quran, one passage says that Jesus will be with God in paradise, Surah 3:45, and another inadvertently states that he will be in hell for being worshipped by Christians, Surah 21:98. I have a very easy answer to this one. He could be in both, because Jesus is omnipotent, omnipresent, right? He's everywhere. So he could be in hell and in paradise. And I believe that Christians believe in his omnipresence and would believe that he is everywhere. Now, I've answered many Christians with this silliness. When they talk about hell being separation from God, I say, how can you be separate from a God who's everywhere? It's not even logically possible. But nonetheless, if they believe that he's everywhere, they have to believe in hell, as little sense as that makes. But that even a Christian doesn't believe that those are contradictions. What a silly example. The Book of Mormon, prior to the 1981 change, says that American Indians will turn white when they conform to Mormonism. If such writings were truly from God, such discrepancies couldn't exist. Maybe it doesn't exist. Maybe they really do turn white when they convert to Mormonism. If you have an example that doesn't fit that, maybe they're not a real Mormon. It's a silly example, but I've heard plenty made defending Christianity and things that ought to be true of Christians, such as myself. I'm an atheist. I used to be a Christian. There's a claim in the Bible, I think in 2 Peter, that Christians can't become non-Christians. So any Christian who hears my story says, no, he wasn't really a Christian. Maybe the Bible is false on that point. All right. Since such alleged books are not from the perfect God, who are they from? They are from deceived, imperfect mankind. So are the books of the Bible. They're written by mankind. The inspiration from God is only found in the Bible, which you have to presuppose in order to believe that that's true. Just bias here. And we've got a chart of different things found in the Bible and the Book of Mormon and the Quran. Different worldview differences, but it's not really that important. The important thing to draw from this is that Christians are biased. They believe that anytime you bring them a contradiction, it must be false because they've already presupposed that it's false, and they will give you answers to them almost always, often very weak, or sometimes they'll just deny them, or they'll say, well, it appears to be a contradiction, but it couldn't be. I just don't have an answer to it. And they're so oblivious to the fact that if they were to look for contradictions from the outside, they would agree with us on most of them. They'd have no problem seeing them as contradictions because when they look for contradictions in other books, they cite the same kinds of things. And I believe that if you brought them to the attention of Mormons or Muslims, they wouldn't say, oh, you found a contradiction. Our holy book turns out not to be true after all. Of course that wouldn't happen. They do the exact same things that the Christians do. It would probably sound a lot like the silliness that I just gave you. But nonetheless, that is chapter 26. Next video we'll go over chapter 27 and 28, How to Properly View Evidence by Ken Ham, and Is the Age of the Earth Salvation Issue by Ken Ham and Buddy Hodge. I think you'll enjoy those, and they'll go rather quickly, at least a lot quicker than this one did. Feel free to comment, subscribe, you know the rest. Peace out.